For every 5 footballers who are truly loved, there are 5 who are severely hated, and Benjamin Mendy fits into that second category perfectly. Once a rising star in French football, and then the most expensive defender in the world, Mendy had everything he could have ever wanted. He had a contract with the best team in the world, a World Cup winners medal, and more money than he knew what to do with. But it seems that for some reason, he wanted what he couldn't have instead. On the 26th of August 2021, Cheshire police charged Mendy with 4 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault over the course of the previous year. His initial application for bail was refused, and he remained in custody, due to breaking a previous bail agreement where he held a party in his house. Potentially another example of Mendy thinking he could get away with anything. He eventually appeared in court on the 10th of September. Whilst in custody, he was charged with 3 more counts of rape, but was granted bail on the condition that he stayed at his home address and gave up his passport. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. But in June of the following year, yet another case was brought forward. After a series of court appearances for each of the cases, he was found not guilty of every charge.
Alhamdulillah.
But just because you're found not guilty doesn't mean that society will accept that as fact. Many still see him as the rapist that he was accused of being, as cases can be lost due to lack of evidence. Having not played for 2 years after the initial arrest, Manchester City announced they'd be releasing him when his contract expired in June of 2023. It'd be a brave club with a very strong PR team that were going to decide to sign him. But Lorient in League One took that bet, and safe to say it was a media shitstorm. Club owner Loic Ferry refused to comment when asked about the signing of Mendy, and all of their social media accounts received endless backlash. But he would go on to make his debut in September of 2023, and even go on to score a goal for them in December. But whilst Mendy is now truly hated, the same can't be said for this next player. Bukayo Saka might be the nicest footballer in the world. From his charity to his politeness, he doesn't feel like he should get away with anything just because he's a footballer. Couldn't be more of the opposite of Mendy if he tried. Bukayo is a devout Christian, and he makes no secret of it, apparently reading sections of the Bible every night. And it may be his beliefs that have led him to be one of the most wholesome footballers of all time. Ahead of the 2022 World Cup, he teamed up with Big Shoe, helping them provide funds to over 120 Nigerian children who needed to have life-changing operations. But in an international competition only 2 years earlier, Saka had received racist and hateful abuse after missing a penalty in the Euros final. The entire country seemingly turned on him, bearing in mind that he was only 18 at the time. One fan wrote a letter to him, reassuring him that he was still his hero, and even left his pocket money in the envelope.
Give me his pocket money. That must mean a lot, because I know when I was a kid, that money means everything.
The young fan was surprised with a tour of the Emirates Stadium, where Saka would show him the pitch himself, playing football with him and giving him an experience that he would never forget. A similar story came out from a 55-year-old bus driver who also sent Saka a letter, saying the same thing. He'd receive a handwritten letter back from Saka thanking him for his support. At this point, he's one of the most well-known players in the world, helping Arsenal achieve greatness, and being one of the most exciting young prospects in Europe. But that doesn't stop him from going back to his old primary school, donating football kits and even seeing a mural that the students had painted in their playground. Some players would assume that they were more important than others after reaching these levels of success, but not Bukayo, and that's clearly shown by how he asked Beckham for a photo. While Saka is a clear embodiment of a kind person and a role model to kids around the world, Ballotelli is the complete opposite. He is definitely hated for what he has done, but it could also be argued that he's hated for what he hasn't. From an early age, he was an amazing talent, and at one point, one of the most promising and exciting prospects in world football. So much so that Man City spent over 20 million euros to bring him over to England. But it was perhaps his time in Italy that had shaped him into the problematic player that he became, after being criticised by multiple managers for his lack of effort, and also being on the receiving end of racist abuse on multiple occasions from supporters in the Italian league. It appears Mario started to hate, well, everybody. And safe to say he didn't help himself either. When he was playing for Inter Milan, he said that he was an AC Milan fan. Probably the worst thing you could possibly say. But even after moving to England, he continued to waste his potential. First off, there was the bib. which wasn't a reason to hate him, but perhaps made people wonder if he was really that stupid. Then there was the fireworks. He decided it would be a great idea on a random night in his Manchester apartment to set off fireworks indoors in his bathroom, and he'd later go on to do a fireworks safety advert, which was just downright amusing. Then there was a story recounted by Jose Mourinho that sums him up perfectly.
All my strikers injured. Mario gets a yellow card. So when I go to the dressing room at halftime, I was spending 14 minutes speaking only for Mario. Don't touch anybody. Play only with the ball. Minute 46.
No way.
Red card.
No way.
There's a running theme of everything that he has done being funny, and Mancini definitely didn't find his attempt at goal in a friendly funny at all, and it led him to substitute him immediately after. Mario never reached his full potential, and it could be said that he had a bit of a victim mentality. This could make sense if you look a little into his childhood, where he was taken in and out of the foster care system repeatedly, but it left him underperforming everywhere he went, and people hated him for wasting his potential because they knew how good he could be. He definitely didn't reach the heights that he was capable of reaching, but that can't be said for this next loved player. Someone who gave their all for both their club and their country, and had a great time whilst doing it, Thomas Muller. A World Cup winner, 12 Bundesliga titles, and a World Cup Golden Boot. But that is not why he was so loved. First off, he's loyal. At more than one point in his career, some of the biggest clubs in Europe wanted him, and probably offered him far more money than he was making. But 22 years ago, a 10-year-old Muller joined the Bayern Munich youth setup, making his first team breakthrough in 2009 and remaining at the club to this day. Constantly referred to as the most underrated and underappreciated player in world football, Muller has been a consistent and vital part of the Bayern Munich team this whole time. Goals, assists, being a leader, you name it, he does it, helping him achieve the record of the most successful German player of all time. On the pitch, he is a fearless leader and a role model to the rest of his team. Off the pitch, he's a character that you can't help but love, even if you're a fan of any other club in the world. It's pretty rare that a footballer shows off his sense of humour like Muller does, but one player who definitely hasn't been accepted for who he is might come as a surprise. One of the greatest players of all time, but also one of the most hated, Cristiano Ronaldo. And it might be for reasons that you don't expect. Don't get me wrong, Ronaldo knows that he's great. He isn't humble at all, but perhaps he has earned the right through his incredible hard work and achievements. But it can definitely rub some people the wrong way. In every industry in the world, there will always be some who hate those who are better than them, simply because they can't compete. And that's often the case with Ronaldo. He is so good that you hate him for it, and he seemingly thrives under the pressure of those haters, putting doubters to shame on multiple occasions. But that's not the only reason why he's hated. If you're a Messi fan, you might hate him because he doesn't seem to think that he's not as good as Messi. He will always think he's better. If you're a casual, you might hate him because he seems like he whines, dives and moans, throws his hands in the air and sulks when he doesn't get his way, which, if we're being honest, is true. And if you have a good memory, it could have been because of the allegations from 2009. And whilst he has never been charged for it, it will always leave some people absolutely convinced that he did it. He's brash, he's cocky, he's great, and he knows it. And no matter who tells him he isn't, he will never believe it. This arrogance leaves a lot of people praying for him to fail. One of the most loved players ever if you're a fan of the clubs that he has played for, but one of the most hated if you're not. But there aren't many players who can say that they stopped their country from going to war, and safe to say, you'd be pretty loved by a lot of people if you did. Well, Didier Drogba is one of those players. The Chelsea legend was loved in West London, that was a given, but it was his native Ivory Coast that needed saving. The date was the 8th of October 2005. A World Cup qualifying spot was on the line for the golden generation of Ivorian football. A squad that showcased the likes of Kolo Touré, Yaya Touré, Zakora, Aboué, and of course Didier Drogba. They needed Cameroon to draw or lose against Egypt, whilst they needed to win their match against Sudan, and they'd be qualified for the World Cup for the first time in their history. But even when their national side was on the verge of history, their country teetered on the edge edge of a civil war. In 2002, an initial civil war had begun between the north and south of the country, but with most of the fighting halted by 2004, the tensions were once again building at the worst time possible for the side on the edge of glory. The future of the country was looking bleak, and it's easy for footballers, especially when playing abroad, to detach themselves from what's going on back home. But the Ivorian players, despite their £1 million lives in Europe, knew that they had to do something to make a change. And Didier Drogba took that responsibility personally. He was a man worth over £20 million, would go on to cement himself in Premier League history. But what good was that if the country he loved no longer existed? Ivory Coast would win 2-1, but 1,600 miles away, their fate was being held in someone else's hands. Cameroon scored in the 20th minute. Was this the end? Would this be the final nail in the coffin that would send Drogba's country to war? 79th minute, Mohamed Chouki. He bundled the ball into the net and brought Egypt level. They just had to hold on for a little bit longer, and they did. Emotions, ecstasy, but they knew that they still had more to do, more to say. It had become a ritual that in the dressing room following their games, Drogba would lead a prayer for his teammates. With cameras in their faces, documenting the moments after their history-making win, the on-pitch performance would be overshadowed by something far more important. Men and women of Ivory Coast.
Du nord et du sud, du centre à l'ouest. Vous avez vu, on vous a prouvé aujourd'hui que toute la Côte d'Ivoire peut cohabiter, peut jouer ensemble pour un même objectif, se qualifier pour le mondial. Vous nous avez promis que cette fête allait rassembler le peuple. Aujourd'hui, on vous demande, s'il vous plaît, on se met à genoux. S'il vous plaît, déposez tous les armes. Faites les élections, organisez les élections et tout ira du mieux. On veut s'amuser.
Both sides of the civil war edged closer and closer to the negotiating table until a ceasefire was finally signed. Loved by Chelsea fans as a club legend, loved by Ivory Coast fans as one of the most talented African players of all time, but even more importantly, loved by an entire nation for saving millions of innocent lives from war. But one player who is nationally loved but internationally hated is none other than one of the most carded players in La Liga history, Pepe. Still playing for his national side at 41, he remains a Portuguese legend, but to anyone facing up against him, he's a nightmare. If you're a Messi fan, then you hate him because he accidentally stamped on the hand of the Argentinian in 2012, or when he supposedly kicked him in the face. If you're a Roma fan, you might hate him for his words that he allegedly exchanged with Keita. The Roma player refused to shake Pepe's hand and even threw a bottle of water at him. And it was later released that this was because Pepe had called him a monkey and then spat at him during their brawl. Throughout his career, he's been given 17 red cards and over 200 yellows. And this is because when he isn't getting his way, Pepe goes into rage mode. In a World Cup that saw Portugal being thrashed 4-0 by Germany, he headbutts one of the most loved players in this video, Thomas Muller, who sat on the ground after a crunching Pepe tackle. And this wasn't the last time that he'd use his head. In the 2014 El Clasico, he and Fabregas butted foreheads, leaving both of them collapsed in supposed agony. But one thing that we know definitely hurt was when Pepe lost his mind against Getafe. It was 2-2 in the dying minutes of the game, and he brought the Getafe player to the ground, before swinging his boot twice at his back, not aiming for the ball at all. An absolute madman with no respect for anyone apart from his teammates. But Ben Foster couldn't be further from the same. Now retired, Ben had a decent career as a professional, playing at Manchester United at the peak of his footballing career. But it would be what he did in the later stages of his career that would have him loved across the footballing world. The Cycling GK, as his YouTube was named, became a hub for fans of the sport to get a deeper insight into what it was really like to be a professional footballer, with his behind the scenes and goal cams showing a perspective never before seen. His podcast, which hosted guests that ranged from ex-professionals to agents to managers and referees, also gave an insight into the world of football that no ex-player had ever given before. But not only that, he is potentially one of the most respectful people in the world, let alone in football. Having featured in a final season under Ryan Reynolds' Wrexham, he moved on from professional play and took his content creation to the next level, collaborating with many household names in the English YouTube scene, and seemingly never having an ego when it came to spending time with people, creating great content and remaining wholesome the entire time. You can just tell from his vlogs and his interactions with fans that he would never hurt a fly. However, Sergio Ramos definitely would. especially if they were shaped like Mohamed Salah. Everyone sees red now and then, but no one in Europe's biggest leagues has ever seen it as much as Ramos. He has seen the card pointed at him 25 times, and it's probably increased since the making of this video. He's so hated by anyone who isn't a fan of the club that he plays for, that when Eric Dyer put in a crunching tackle on him, it united the entire internet, who celebrated the Spaniard rolling in pain. And Liverpool fans will have been the first ones cheering. Many Scousers believe that he intentionally tried to dislocate Mo Salah's shoulder, and it's hard to believe he wasn't after you see the clip. And that was before he elbowed keeper Karius in the face, moments before he'd go on to make a series of mistakes that would ultimately win Real Madrid the game. We wouldn't be surprised if he had concussion after that. And he even doubled down the following day, saying that his conscience was completely clear after what he did. His history of foul play, crunching tackles and losing his head makes him an easy player to hate. But someone who doesn't fall into that same category is Luka Modric, potentially the most famous man in Croatian history, with one of the saddest childhood stories of any footballer in the world. He grew up living a humble life, herding goats at a young age and living with his grandparents until he was forced to flee his war-torn country. He would leave without his grandfather, who he would never see again. Luka Sr. was murdered by Serbian rebels, and his childhood home was reduced to ash. But that wouldn't stop him from becoming one of the most successful and most loved footballers of all time. Dynamo Zagreb, Tottenham, and Real Madrid fans all loved him. He was a hard-working and gritty midfielder who had the ability to change a game in seconds. But it was his performance in the 2018 World Cup that solidified him as a national hero. Playing a crucial role in Croatia's journey to the final against France, he was the player with the largest distance covered in every single game, giving it his absolute all until the final minute. He covered over 45 miles of ground across the entire tournament, and his assist and 2 goals helped them overcome hard-fought matches. And despite a loss to France in the final, he returned to Croatia flooded with love. Thousands of fans greeted him in his hometown, shutting down roads for as far as the eye could see. And that's without mentioning his insanely large trophy cabinet or his Ballon d'Or. Any team in the world would be lucky to have Luka, and that's why he makes it on this list as one of the most loved players of all time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, and maybe click on one of these videos as well.